Okay, so let's go over chapter 10. Um, and the authors describe this as a product protocol, which is an interesting description. I've always thought of it as the product delivery map, or the deliverables for a product. And I think you hear that term more often than you hear product protocol, but maybe it's just industries that you're in. In the technology industry, it was always product deliverables. Um, so let's. Where's my mouse? Let's come here. Okay, so here's the problem. And this is why we need a definition of deliverables or protocol, as the authors call it. You know, marketing goes to R&D and says we need a solar-powered version of our standard garage door opener. And R&D says, so how reliable should it be? How should it be controlled into the house? Should we use electronic technology? He comes with serious questions. And marketing says, well, you're the technical people. You make some recommendations. Well, in other words, you don't know. You know, and then they go back and forth, right? Because the R&D people are afraid if they deliver something that you don't want, you're going to just tell them they're going to work on this stuff and go off on a tangent, and they're going to be down a road that they think is cool, but you don't want. And the marketing people, if they work alone without any direction or feedback back and forth, they come up with things that are impossible to make. So, you know, there's got to be this sort of discussion as to where you want to go, what the goals are. Now, and there's got to be a way to keep these things in sync. So we started this with the pick, right? Where we said, here's what we want. But this is more of an operations thing. Step by step, what do we have to do each step of the way? Now, the book starts to introduce this concept of Obeya, which is really cool. Kind of dated, if you think of it in the way that it's sometimes presented. But if you think of it of what it is at its core. So when they describe Obeya, they're describing it as being like one big room. And in this room, we have a description of what we want to build. We have sort of a whole like Gantt chart or something showing the step-by-step progression as to how we're going to go through this and timelines. You've got you've got captured information from voice of the customer. You've got all the information that you could possibly want to sort of come back and make a product, right? That everyone will need to know, and it shows progress of everyone who's working on the project, and it's this transparent sharing of information. And I think there's something inherently, and I've worked for Japanese firms, and there's something inherently different about Japanese management and American management. You know, in Japanese management, for a long time, it was assumed that you were going to work for the same company for your life, and that you had like guaranteed employment. And there was this sense of teamwork, and you know, we're all to work together as a team instead of as an individual. And since there was this sort of sense of belonging and that your job wasn't in jeopardy, there was radical sharing of information back and forth about where people stood and what was going on. People weren't sort of hiding and padding. You find that in many American companies, well, people will sort of throw smoke so you don't realize that they're in trouble or not doing anything. In Japanese companies, it's really encouraged that everyone brings stuff to the table. So this idea of radical transparency, which American management is coming around to. If you want to talk about 30 years ago, people would oftentimes try to hide things. Today, it's becoming much more transparent. Part of that is that it's easy to get the data, right? So when we talk about these Obeya rooms, in reality today, it's probably going to be some sort of major app. It could be built in Slack, it could be on Teams, or it could be in some sort of project management system, more like, say, ClickUp or Asana, or even to a much less extent Trello, or some of the other stuff. I'm trying to draw a blank on the name of the company. It's Trello, but it'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, the point is that you'll have software applications that will give you the timeline, that'll show you the status of each part of the product, that'll show you where your team members are, and will be capturing day in and day out and making available to the team all this information. That's part of the equation. But the other part of the Obeya room is this relationship that's built back and forth. That you're not going to get as easily if this is just an online app. That requires sort of more of a coming together, which is why if we look at Lean and Agile and Scrum, which we've already begun to discuss, these usually start off with that Scrum meeting at the beginning of each day to say, okay guys, here's where are you now? What are the problems? How can we help? Let's move forward. What are our next steps? And everyone's real clear on where they're going. There's not this, hiding stuff that's going on. So, I could talk for an hour just about the reason why Xerox isn't in charge of the computer industry in this country, and it had to do with the fact that people were just hiding stuff. They're the most brilliant people in the world, but they're all working in different directions and thinking that the other group, was evil and they were going to go across boundaries. So it's about having cross-functional teams. It's about having shared, transparent information. It's about radical transparency and shared goals and values, right? And building relationships with your team members, which is a hard part today. Okay, so what are the requirements? What are the definitions? I think we've all kind of talked about that. Okay, purpose of the protocol is to sort of determine which way you're going to go in what sort of life cycle, set boundaries, understand that, for example, if you're looking for a certain price point, coming out with something that's not going to reach that price point, that maybe double that price isn't going to work. So what's the goal here, right? Okay, so here's like the steps that you might include, or the elements you might include in your protocol. So who are your target markets? So who are you going after? What are the customers that you're trying to do? Now, what is the product positioning? So let's just switch over for a second to my camera here. So let's say that right now, if we were looking at a continuum here, just a quality and price, we might have different cars on here, right? So if you were to say, I don't know, we were put up here like, we'll put up here like a Lexus and, like a Mercedes, right? We'll put over here maybe a lower quality and lower price, might be like a Kia or a Hyundai, right? And then maybe positioned somewhere in here might be a Toyota or a Mazda, right? So you would position cars maybe in quality and price compared to their competitors. So it looks like we might have room in the year for a low quality, low price car, right? Which might be, say, the let's say the Tata Nano, right? Which was in the book, which would be an example. So there's a logical positioning. Where are you sitting relative to your competitors, right? If we only had Kias and Lexuses, then we could see, there's an obvious gap here. Maybe there's a space here where we could position a car to address this audience in this way. So what is the positioning of the product relative to the competitors? What are the product attributes or benefits? And again, here, benefits sell more than attributes. Engineers love to talk about, in the technology industry, we call it speeds and feeds, right? How fast this thing is and what's coming into it and from where, right? And for technical people, they inherently know what that means. But for the rest of the world, they don't necessarily translate that right away. So you have to sort of talk about what the benefits will be for people. And if you look at the way that they usually position, like say a new iPhone when it comes out, they're going to be positioning it saying, oh, you can take movies that are like cinema quality. They don't talk to you about how many megapixels it is or how many the frame rate per second, because for the average person that goes right past them. But if you talk about, it's going to be like being able to make real cinematic movies. Oh, okay, I get it. That's what that means. Okay, competitive comparison, so who else is out there, and how do you want to rate against them, you know. Now let's talk about augmented dimensions. And so again, just back to my sort of screen here. If we look, I'm going to get a different black pen because that one's a little weak. Hopefully this one is better. Okay, so let's say we have our minimally viable product, right? So I think I described this in an earlier video as being, you know, like an airplane where you don't have a website and you can't pick your seat in advance, right? So you might have then, you know, like an augmented product here. So instead of just the raw minimum, you've got these pluses on top of it. So instead of just a plane that, you know, you walk up to, you go up to it on the airport and pay the guy as you're stepping in. No, you pay in advance. No, you pick your seat in advance. No, when you get on the plane, there's actually snacks, and maybe when you get on a plane, there's actually entertainment. That would be augmented. And then you can go up in levels of augmentation, right, to what people expect, right, and then even what the product potential might be. So, so if we said, you know, you start off and yeah, now you can buy your tickets in advance, but people expect that they're going to be able to pick their seat, and they're going to be wide body seats, and there's going to be some entertainment, there's going to be some food on the flight, right? And that's what we've got to deliver. But maybe the potential might be you're going to get picked up by a limo, driven to a private club that's on the airport grounds where you can have a snack and drink before you get on the plane, that when you get on the plane there'll be a masseuse, and by the way, you'll have your own little private cabin on the plane where you can stretch out and take a nap, and you'll have your own mini bar and your own, you know, refrigerator there. Wow, that potential, right? And that's super high end. But so we're, you know, beyond the minimally viable product, the core base product. What can we do? What can we get that would? That's not what I want. I want this. We can get to sort of make this better. Okay, so what are the augmented dimensions you might add, and for what submarkets, right? Marketing requirements. What does marketing need in order to deliver this product? What if, you know, which could be that, you know, colors and features and even maybe deliverables that they might want to have in order to go with the product. You could have the financial requirements. What's the hurdle rate that you're going to make with this? You know, or how are we having this made? Are we making it ourselves? Are we outsourcing this? Are we outsourcing that? And how much is that going to cost? And do we have the budget for that? Right? What are the production requirements? So how many of these do we have to make, and what kind of facilities is it going to require? You know, regulatory requirements. Do we have to get the legal team involved in getting approvals for certain things and whatnot? And does this fit into the corporate strategy? You know, what are the potholes along the way? We talked about potholes last week. What are the things that can sort of run this off the rails? So these things would be sort of elements of a protocol or the deliverables that you're going to need in order to keep the product going. And if you had, you know, if you were sharing, these were the kind of things that would be shared across the team. So the Obeya room would look more like this, right? We'd have all this information available there, along with product schedules and production schedules and everything else. All right. All right, so this is just an example of that, and I'm not going to go through the protocol examples. You can see those. I think you get the idea from what I've done so far. Okay, voice of the customer. Now, this voice of the customer thing, a lot of times this is done with focus groups. Be careful, all right? Be careful how you ask these questions. Some with focus groups, or you call existing customers and you ask them. And there's two problems with this, how this is often done. One is you only talk to your existing customers. That would be a classic problem, right? You only talk to your existing customers. There may, however, be a large group of people out there that is currently underserved with the current product, right? So you should be talking to not only your current customers, but those people that you might want to be customers in the future. And find out what's bothering them, right? You don't ask them what they want because they're not going to tell you. And we've had this discussion already before. People are not really good at visualizing things that don't already exist. So you have to tell them what's sort of possible, and also listen to the pain points. When they talk about their days, when they talk about what they do or don't like about the current way they solve their problems. I like my current coffee maker, but I don't like, it upsets me a little bit that those current little plastic pods are going to be in the earth forever. They're going to outlive me. Oh, that's a problem, right? Or I like my current coffee maker, but it takes too long, right? Oh, okay. So that gives you more of a direction, but what you're saying is, well, what do you want in a cup of coffee, and what do you want that coffee experience to be like? So you've got to ask questions in a different way. Steve Jobs was, it's really hard to design a product by focus group. A lot of times people don't know what they want until you show it to them, which is true. Like, they didn't know they want an iPhone. You can't ask customers what they want and try to get them to give that to you. By the time you get it built, they'll want something new. So what does the voice of the customer mean? You're trying to understand where their life. You're trying to have empathy. This goes back to the design thinking thing we've already talked about. If you Stanford University, the first thing is try to understand the problems that they're running into and how they live their life day in and day out, and what could make that life better and what's possible, right? And let's talk about this. I think is an example, two good examples. So, and in fact, better than this, I'm going to go through these, but I'm going to say that I've added to the media files, I've added a link to a discussion, very short discussion, it's like 5 minutes, from Clayton Christensen, who was one of the innovation deans at Harvard, and he was hired by McDonald's to understand the problem that they had with their milkshakes. And, after talking to the customer time and time again, they'd say, we want it thicker, we want it chunkier, we want it chewier, we want it colder, we want it warmer, whatever. Every dimension that they would give them, they would make, and then began to realize that the customer wasn't changing their buying habits at all. And it wasn't until they started observing their customers that they realized that, wow, we've actually got a large number of customers who are doing the following things. And watch the video. I think it should be telling. Anyway, the jet skis, same thing. Customers were saying that they wanted padding so when they were standing that they would be more comfortable. Well, Kawasaki was not paying attention to that, and their customers, their competitors, built a seat. The next thing you know, boom, they're out there ahead of them with a jet ski with a seat in it instead of stand-up jet ski. And the Tata Nano there's a huge buzz around this when it came out. It was one of those things you saw a lot of business press people talking about, a lot of academics talking about. So the Tata Nano was, in theory, going to replace scooters in India. Now you can go to poor areas of India, and you could see a family of 4 riding on a scooter. A husband, wife, and 2 kids, and the kids barely hanging on, and they're doing it in the rain. So the guy who owned Tata, the Tata Group, said, wow, we could just make a cheap car for not much more than it would cost for a motorbike, and it'd be safer than having people on motorbikes. But when they built it, they didn't sell very well because they looked kind of cheap, because they were only $2,000. They looked kind of cheap, and they weren't particularly safe. They would never pass a U.S. highway safety standard. So the customers didn't want them. They didn't want to look like they had this cheap car. So I think understanding how the customer is reacting and understanding what they're saying and how they might see things is this requires a great deal of empathy, and not directly asking the customer the question, because they either won't tell you the truth or they won't know what they're saying. You have to sort of feel around, and this is why we were talking before about conjoint analysis and things like that. You might try different things with a customer and ask them how they feel about different things, just to see the sense of where their problems are and what they perceive their problems to be. And once you understand that, you might have a much better way of attacking the problem. And one tool that gets used in doing this is sort of these QFD houses, right? Where you've got what the benefits are that the customer wants, and then what are the attributes or technologies that you're going to use, to the features that you're going to use to get to these things on the left. And then you score yourself on how you do with your current products, and these new solutions, what it would take to actually do those with your current products. Okay, so I think that sort of gives us a sense for the major parts of what we're looking for here. I just kind of go over this endlessly. Okay, criterion for good team selection. Okay, so again, we've said before, diversity is a huge part of your team. You want people who see the world differently than each other. So you want people from the different disciplines like finance, accounting, marketing, production, all that. But you also want people who have different backgrounds, right? They don't come from the same schools. They don't come from, they don't belong to the same country club necessarily, right? They don't necessarily, maybe not ethnically the same, maybe different genders, right? You want people who have a different perspective on the world. And it's not those attributes in and of themselves, because you can have someone who is, a minority, but grew up very, very wealthy, and in a very, very wealthy, neighborhood that was, say, primarily, like a upper middle class neighborhood. They probably are not that different than the guy across the street who may be a different ethnicity than they are. So you want people from different economic backgrounds, different perspectives, different disciplines, different religions. I mean, people who see the world, different countries, people who see the world differently, who've had different experiences. Okay. Point of administrator to be the advocate of the customer. Team members should have ultimate responsibility to act on the results. So remember that you want to create a certain level of autonomy within the team. And the only way you do that is by picking the right people, making sure they have the right information, making sure they understand when they're stepping on each other and when they're going over the boundaries. So I think that is it for this. Yes, okay. So I will see you in the next